So today in our camera spotlight, we're featuring a historic, I believe it's Kodak, I believe it's a Hawkeye, a 4x5, I believe it's an anniversary version camera. There's an awful lot of things that I don't know about this camera. It looks to me like a large version of a Kodak Hawkeye box camera, but I've had a really hard time finding information out about it online. But we're gonna shoot some film through it today and see what we think. The rounded windows here, the viewfinder windows, make me believe that this is an anniversary version from the 1920s because they did the same kind of window viewfinder in the smaller box cameras. In terms of the film, if on here on the back, you come over this way just a little bit. Here on the back, there's a button like a detent that you can press, and it causes this latch to open. And in here, my 4x5 film holders perfectly fit and lock in place. I'm gonna load up first some Ilford HP5 just because I'm gonna do some shooting indoors. We're gonna process the film in 510 Pyro. Now, I have no idea what the actual focal length of this camera is, but I can see that the opening, the iris is right here, and that's back just a little bit. So if I pull out a micrometer and I open this back up on here, I can see where the film plane is right there. And if I measure this distance with my micrometer, it comes in at about 135 millimeters, which 135 was a very standard focal length for cameras during this period. In terms of shutter speed, it has two. It has on the front here an interval, which is just probably a 30th of a second. And then it has T, keeps it open for as long as you want. That's all you have in terms of shutter speed. So if we know, if we believe that the camera is a 135 millimeter focal length, and I don't know what the f-stop is, all we have to do is take the micrometer, stick it in the opening, measure it, and it's 7 millimeters. So you divide the focal length by the opening, and that should give us, because I did the math before, about f19, f20, somewhere in there. So I'm gonna say it's f20. So instead of f22. So that's the basic setup. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go load some film in the holders. I'm gonna shoot this interior shot. I have no idea where this is focused for, whether it's set at infinity, whether it's focused for 10 feet, 20 feet, I just don't know. I'm also gonna shoot some film outdoors. It is very cold today in Vermont, but I'm gonna go outside and shoot a sheet where I can look at different distances and be able to sort of figure out approximately the lens is actually focused at what distance. So this is kind of a mystery camera, but it's one that I'm excited to sort of play with. I bought it a year ago and literally have not had a chance to shoot any film through it till now. All right, so we have the shot all set up. The camera to my subject, my amazing wife Eve, is about 11 feet or so. The exposure with HP5, it's 400 speed and 510 Pyro. It hits box speed every time. It's about 2 seconds in this light. So that should be okay. But what I'm gonna do, because there's no cable release on this camera, is I'm going to take a dark microcloth in my hand and hold it over the lens when I first trip the shutter, and then step away and then cover it again. I'm just trying to prevent any kind of camera shake, if at all possible. Film. Okay, it's in. I'm pulling out the dark slide. Camera is all set. I'm gonna cover the front of the lens, Evie, with my hand. I'm going to release 1,000, 2, 1,000, and then close the shutter. And then we'll put this dark slide back in. We'll take the camera outside into the freezing cold weather. I'll do one shot of the other side of the film here, and then we'll process it and see how it looks. It's exciting though to me that a camera that probably hasn't had film shot through it in 100 years, most likely, or somewhere near that, is getting used today. All right, so we're now out in the studio. We have all the film loaded into my JOBO Expert Tank. Really an awesome way of processing sheet film. I've got the JOBO configured for large format film as well. I'm going to turn it on and allow the drum to get up to temp a little bit. My water is perfectly at temp. I have my 510 Pyro measured out. So it's 1 to 100. So I'm going to use a syringe here and add the 5 milliliters of 510. I'm going to mix it up. It's an awesome developer. And I'm going to be processing it for 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Temperature is perfect. So I will dump that in. And away we go. All right, drum roll, please. The negatives look actually shockingly good. They're clean. I wouldn't call them razor sharp. The one on the right had a little bit of a light issue, as you can see from some fog in there, but that was really my fault more than the cameras. So let's pop them on the Imacon and see how they look. Okay, wow. I mean, holy smokes. I can't believe that the camera looks this amazing. I mean, 510 Pyro is one of my favorite Pyro developers. Married with HP5, what a classic combination. But marry that with a 100-plus-year-old camera, holy smokes. It looks so good. Look how beautiful the windows are held, the rendering, everything about this portrait just feels gorgeous. Now, one thing that I noticed is that if we zoom into Eve right now, you'll see that she's pretty darn sharp. But what's really sharp is the wall behind her. So either there was some movement on her end, I mean, it was a 2+ second exposure, or the focus really is about 12 feet, 13 feet, which is very possible. But I'm just absolutely blown away by how beautiful this camera that I found in a vintage, store in Vermont for 50 or 60 bucks, I think I paid for it, turned out. It's just gorgeous. I may actually start carrying this camera around with me for a while. So I, for one, am super impressed of how good this looks. Let's take a look at the outdoor shot that I did, where we're going to be just checking for distances. All right, once again, I mean, there is a little bit of flare in the bottom there, but that was from the film holder not being held properly tight in the camera. I'll talk more about that in my conclusion. But overall, I'm really impressed. It has this wonderful sort of soft focus fall off towards the corners. In the middle where those branches are, I'll zoom in, are actually like shockingly sharp. So I'm super impressed with this camera overall. All right, so in conclusion, I have a couple thoughts I want to get to. First, if you've never used 510 Pyro and HP5, you should try it. It is an absolutely gorgeous film developer combination. And I think I'll pull the portrait right now of my wife back up. Look at how beautiful that tonality is. And this is with a very simple meniscus lens. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. It was one of my go-to film developer combinations for many years, and this reminds me why. It's funny, when you haven't shot large format in a while, and I shoot a ton of 4x5 over the years, but it's been a year or two since I've really worked in large format again. You really, when you see one of those negatives again, and look at all that extra real estate of film that you get from a large format piece of film, it's incredible once you start to scan it. It's so creamy and so smooth and so beautiful that I'm just like, wow, it just absolutely blew me away today. And especially with a camera that's easily over 100 years old, again, with just a simple meniscus lens, it's a big wow. Now, in terms of the camera going forward, what would I do? Well, first, I'm gonna create a little shim system to help hold the film holders in a little tighter. The reality is modern plastic film holders, while they're perfectly flat and all that, the film plane registration's correct, they're not as thick as the old wood holders were. And as a result, there's a little more play in there between the springs holding it against the film plane. So I'm just gonna build a little shim to keep it tighter. I'm also probably going to work with the slower speed film. I really want to play with the idea of motion and long exposures. So I'm probably going to put Fomapan 100 in there. I will probably also process that in 510 Pyro. It's a really great combination. And I have a ton of it in my freezer, which is great. And the reciprocity correction for Fomapan 100 is kind of terrible. And that'll also work in my benefit of allowing me to have longer exposures. Because remember, I've only got a 30th of a second at best and T and one f-stop. So I've got to sort of be able to work within that range. But overall, I am blown away by the overall quality and how much fun this post was. This post, I made it just this afternoon, and I'm really just kind of wishing I'd broken this camera back out during the holidays and taken some photos then with it. But I guarantee you, going forward, I'll definitely be shooting more with this camera. Now, also in the comments, if you enjoyed looking at the large format today and the processing, and you'd like me to post additional videos on 4x5, working with movements and all that kind of stuff on those cameras, let me know and I can make that happen. Thank you very much for listening. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Now go shoot some film.